Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Ivan from a project called Aragon, and I'll try to answer a question that we for a fact know nobody knows the answer to, or how to DAO. So the project that I'm part of is called Aragon. In 2016, we built the first DAO infrastructure. Today, projects like Lido, Curve, and Decentraland are using that code base to govern their organizations. In 2023, at Denver, we released an entirely new stack, both protocol, SDK, and an app. And we also ourselves are doing some steps towards becoming more decentralized. I'm going to cover a few things around why are people creating DAOs, how what we've seen to work across the ecosystem, as well as touching on some lessons that we ourselves at Aragon had. So what is a DAO? There are like, I don't know, 50 different definitions floating around the space, but the one that we feel most closely associated with is a DAO is an organization run on smart contracts on a public blockchain. The decentralized aspect of it ties more to the organization being ran on a trustless, permissionless blockchain. So technically, if you want to launch a dictator DAO, like where like one person makes all the decisions, it still is a DAO, right? It runs on public blockchain. It's autonomous because permissions and rights are granted and revoked via smart contracts instead of via an admin. And then the organization aspect of this means just it's like a group of agents. To this day, it's mostly humans and companies, but maybe soon AI. So that's why we say it's a group of agents that coordinate towards a common objective. So how did this happen? Vitalik published a blog post where he introduced the idea of a DAO in 2014. Then in 2015, Rune and Stefan, started interacting on a forum, and that interaction gave birth to MakerDAO, the project behind DAI, the stablecoin backed by Ethereum initially, and then like by a basket of assets. That's the oldest DAO, and it's still around, which is awesome. The year 2016 was very interesting for DAOs. A big part of the Ethereum community gathered around the idea of like, let's pool resources together and grow the ecosystem, created the DAO, put a ton of money in there, and then it got hacked. So then after that happened, nobody wanted to hear anything about DAOs except us. Jorge and Luis, who are the founders of Aragon, they started building a code base that would allow the proliferation of DAOs. Later on in 2019, the Moloch governance framework was born that introduced a very interesting and important feature called Rage Quit, and as well as like a bunch of other innovations. 2020, Compound did their compound contract base, as well as they introduced liquidity incentives as a token distribution model, which was a big innovation at the time. And since then, we've seen a lot of products and protocols DAOify, ENS, Arbitrum Optimism, and like a few other sizable projects in the space, Uniswap, Sushi, transition towards being ran as a DAO. We also, in that time frame, captured some media attention with like mimetic use cases like Constitution DAO. I think this is like a New York Times. And we also saw the emergence of like innovative both decision making and funding bootstrapping models like Nouns. It's been turbulent 5-6 years, and everything is still in experimentation. Some people get upset when we say it's an experiment. It's like, oh my god, there's a lot of value at stake. But yeah, there is a lot of value at stake, but it's still largely an experiment. Like, we're doing things in a new way, and things break, things don't always work as intended. So why are people building DAOs today? The first category, as I mentioned, it's products and protocols. I do believe it's one of the more interesting ones because in addition to a treasury in that setup, you are also governing jointly a code base that sometimes holds a lot of value. We have capital collectives, which are tied to either philanthropy or just plain investments. Like Unchained Fund got structured around the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, and it was meant to support relief efforts for Ukrainian refugees. HydroDAO is an investment DAO that invests in other investment DAOs, and then Flamingo is one of the most successful investment DAOs to date that invest in NFTs. It's a pretty straightforward use case. That's why it's the one we are furthest along figuring out. Then another interesting things that we've seen are work collectives, which are sort of like a digitally native cooperative where people gather together to participate in gaming guilds or like do contractor work. And the last category, which is the wild one, it's clubs and cults, where people gather around an idea, a persona, or an activity. So, this is part of the why, but there is another part of the why. It's why distribute ownership. So the governance token is in essence a way of distributing ownership in whatever we are doing together, right? So there is like the origination angle, which is the grassroots thing of like, we're gathered here today to do something awesome together, and like everybody's like chipping in from the very beginning. We shape what we want to build together, and it sounds awesome. It hasn't happened that much yet, and I think there is like some infrastructure gaps around it. Crowdfunding, it was the most popular thing in 2017, 2018, the ICO age, some of you might remember. It was like basically Kickstarter, right? Like I'm gonna build this thing, it's gonna be awesome. Here is some tokens that you can use the thing I haven't yet built, you will use it in the future. And then 2019, 2020, like projects figure out like I'm gonna raise a bunch of money to pay users to use my product. Let's just shortcut this and like pay the users, right? So this is something that PayPal did in the early 2000s, where it was like, here's $10, try my product. So Uniswap did like, here is 400 tokens for having tried my product, and like that unleashed a whole torrent of like projects that were using this as a growth hack. Interestingly, most projects fall in either growth or crowdfunding. The one that is ideologically the reason to create a decentralized organization to a certain extent is like, oh, we want to create organizations that don't have single points of failure, where we bring resilience. The reality is, A, there are very few organizations that are in that bucket, but also there are very few organizations that are at a point where they need to be in that bucket, right? Because if there is no value to be captured by becoming like a single decision maker in an organization, like the security of being more decentralized is more of a complication than an added benefit. So the second part of the presentation is going to be about looking at what works. Justine from the Optimism Foundation compiled like an amazing resource that I've drawn a lot of inspiration from, and like basically everyone who's dealing with DAOs and governance is looking up to that resource. It's called the Collective DAO Archives. Look it up. So, how do we DAO? Nothing is clear cut. Everything is an experiment still. I'm going to do some oversimplifications, but basically, the idea of the presentation is to give you like a first idea of like, okay, why and how do we approach this if we want to set up a DAO? So, token distribution is the most important question that you would have to answer. the dominant governance model in the space at the moment is like one token, one vote. There is sometimes delegation layered on top of it. And it faces a lot of criticism. And the thing is, if you do a good job distributing the token in the beginning, you would solve a lot of those problems, and then you can continue iterating. So it's very important, that slide from a few minutes ago. Like give yourself an honest answer. Like why am I building a DAO? It's very unlikely that you need the resilience, right? It's more likely that you fall in one of the other three categories, and that reasoning would evolve over time. But at the time when you're distributing tokens, like you should have an idea of like why are you doing this. Then who are we? So we have this thing of like the community, and in 2017, 2018, it was like a bunch of people that will shill our project on Twitter, and like thankfully we're past that stage, but still community is it's very bad oversimplification of the stakeholders that are relevant to a project, right? So those might be like teams that are building on your infrastructure. Those might be users of your product. Those might be vendors that you're relying upon to ship that product, right? So it's important to like have a good idea of how does my stakeholder map look like, and then appropriately allocate decision-making power and ownership into your project to that stakeholder base. And then timing is also important, right? So some of those protocols are meant to last for like decades, if not hundreds of years. And yet, most of the tokens so the decision on how to distribute tokens and the distribution itself, more often than not, happens in like 3 to 6 months. Sometimes, you have the vesting of like 3 years. Bitcoin took 14 years to distribute 90% of the network. Most projects today do that in like 3 years, right? So you should think also of like, okay, like 10 years from now, how do I incentivize someone to work on this? And it's not a problem you have to solve today, but it's something that to have in mind. Now we have a token. How do we govern? You would have that wrong, for sure. Like there's going to be someone who's going to be unhappy about it. Start simple and evolve over time. Our entire new product stack is shaped around this idea. A lot of projects start as a multi-sig, doing like one token, one vote as a starting point, and then maybe starting to experiment, like layer reputation on top of it, or layer like depending on how much you've been contributing to the project, like I'm gonna give you more decision-making power, etc., etc. Like is something that you absolutely should do over time, but you should keep in mind that if you brick your governance at some point early on, you can like just basically make it impossible to continue the progress of the project. And yeah, people will be unhappy. Always. There's always going to be someone who's not happy with the way you govern, even if it's actually a good model. Start simple, iterate. Pro tip, you would need an emergency multisig. Don't fight it, you need one. Every big project has one, right? Curve has one, Aave has one, Balancer has one. You have to scope it carefully. Usually that should be block-only type of functionality. It's like, like there is a malicious proposal coming through. Let's just block it before it even gets to voting, for example. Or after it's approved, let's just block it. The rage quit functionality I mentioned earlier is like also another way of going around with this, right? It's like, a proposal went through, it's gonna like kill the project, whatever, drain the code, drain value from the code base. Let us just like pull resources out of the system before the exploit actually happens in like a delay window, for example. But you need to have a way to fastly respond to threats. You can't go through like your general governance process, which is like usually multiple weeks. Threats in this space take you see like initial test of an exploit, and then like within an hour, like hundreds of millions are drained, right? Next step, strategy. So anything that moves needs a strategy, in the business world at least. And something that is important to keep in mind is early on we had this like, oh, DAOs are like mission-driven organizations, and like you have the mission, vision, values statement, which is very important. The point is, you have to have some sort of a consistent alignment of how we get there if you want to avoid the proliferation of conflict. So you want to have some frameworks instead of recipes. You don't know everything that's going to be happening. You want to foster a way of thinking through trade-offs that is consistent throughout the organization. So like founders phase out, but because of the way we think about approaching the challenge that we are trying to address, we can still like maintain a general direction that is consistent. Second point is execution is king. Basically, no matter how good the strategy is, you rely on a team to actually do the job. If that team doesn't have buy-in into whatever strategy you've devised, it's not going to work. They'll just do something else. So you need to have the buy-in of the team. And a lot, I mean, maybe I'm the crazy one, but like as a kid, I believe a lot of us did the fry an ant with a lens. A lot of teams working in the open environment of a DAO suffer from that. There are people that burn out because you get questioned by a bunch of random people sometimes. Sometimes those are legit questions, but like you get questioned in the open about a lot of the decisions you make. So it's important to set a culture that allows for like healthy discourse, but your team shouldn't become like a response help desk where it's like, oh, but why are we doing this feature instead of that feature? Like that sort of discourse should probably be like culturally filtered to a minimum to allow the team to actually do the work. When it comes to operations, we had this idea of oh, this is a DAO and like everybody can come in and do whatever they want, right? Nah, nothing happens, right? So you would need some sort of a structure. If you have that explicitly, it is better than having than letting soft power run wild. Because like soft power is like, oh, I'm just gonna like slide into this guy's DMs and like ask him to align with me, and then I'll go to that person, and I'll be like, yo, like let's do this, and you start having a lot of like backroom conversation if you don't have some sort of a formalized structure around, like this is the engineering team, probably someone who just joined the project a week ago to do growth shouldn't weigh in on, infrastructure decisions. So having some sort of formalized decision-making process is good, it's not bad. When it comes to compensated contributions, again, start simple. There is a core team that does continuous work, or guilds, or however you want to shape it. They get some sort of a stream of payment, and then you push more and more towards like contained projects, either through RFPs or through grants. We have about a minute left. Rapid fire. Okay, when it comes to legal, speak to a lawyer, potentially two different lawyers that don't know each other, because if we leave it to lawyers, nothing will ever get done because they're overly cautious sometimes. You need someone who has the mentality of like, how do I make this happen, not why I shouldn't make this happen. When it comes to tools, again, subtle shill, the Aragon OS X is structured with the idea of evolving. You don't want to change your entire stack from day one. You just want to keep that door opened so that you can progressively change your stack. This ties a bit into the on-chain versus off-chain. You can think of, or at least I think of on-chain as security guarantees, and that has cost. And that cost is not only the gas fees. The cost of bringing things on-chain also relates to adding complexity to your processes, because you have to boil down everything to some logic that can be encoded. And a lot of things that organizations do can't really be directly encoded. Community, start building it before you have a token. The token is a multiplier, not a way to build a community. Someone who comes just for the airdrop is not going to stick around and they'll stab you in the back for sure. Treasury, you do that wrong, people will be unhappy. Just make sure the project has money to survive. Ask a professional for help if you have access to one. That's it. Thanks, everyone.